The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan valley, as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his tactical vest for what felt like the 100th time. The weight of his gear had become second nature after 3 deployments, but today something felt different. The intelligence briefing had been unusually detailed about a high-value target hiding in a compound just outside Kandahar province. Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked his weapon one final time. Around him, his squad of 8 Marines moved with practiced efficiency, each man focused on the mission ahead. They had been tracking this particular Taliban commander for months, and today's operation promised to be their best chance at capturing him alive. The convoy of armored vehicles rumbled through the dusty roads, kicking up clouds of sand that seemed to follow them like ghosts. Rodriguez sat in the lead vehicle, studying aerial photographs of their target location. The compound was larger than most they had encountered, with multiple buildings surrounded by high walls. Intelligence suggested the target was using it as a training facility for new recruits. As they approached the outer perimeter of the village, Rodriguez felt the familiar knot in his stomach that came before every mission. He had learned to trust that feeling over the years. It had kept him alive through countless firefights and explosive encounters. Today that knot felt tighter than usual. The radio crackled with updates from their eye-in-the-sky drone operator. Overwatch to ground team, we have movement in the compound. Multiple heat signatures, possibly 12 to 15 individuals. Rodriguez acknowledged the report and signaled his team to prepare for dismount. The vehicles came to a stop behind a cluster of abandoned buildings, about 300 meters from their target. Rodriguez gathered his squad leaders around him, spreading the photographs on the hood of their vehicle. The plan was straightforward but required precise timing. 2 teams would approach from opposite sides while a third provided overwatch from an elevated position. Remember, we want this guy alive if possible, Rodriguez reminded his men. But don't take unnecessary risks. If it goes sideways, we adapt and overcome. The Marines nodded, their faces serious beneath their helmets. These were seasoned warriors who had faced combat before, but Rodriguez could see the tension in their eyes. As they began their approach, the village seemed eerily quiet. No children playing in the streets, no vendors calling out their wares, no normal sounds of daily life. The silence itself was a warning sign that Rodriguez filed away in his mind. Local villagers had learned to disappear when trouble was brewing. The first team reached their position without incident. Rodriguez watched through his scope as they took cover behind a low stone wall. His own team was still 50 meters from their designated spot when the radio buzzed with an urgent whisper. Contact front. Armed individuals on the roof of the main building. Rodriguez raised his binoculars and spotted 2 figures with assault rifles scanning the area below. They had not yet noticed the approaching Marines, but it was only a matter of time. He made a quick decision to alter their approach route, leading his team through a narrow alley that would provide better concealment. The smell of cooking fires and livestock filled the air as they moved deeper into the village. Rodriguez could hear distant voices speaking in Pashto, but could not make out the words. His heart rate increased as they closed the distance to their target. Every doorway, every window, every rooftop presented a potential threat. Suddenly, a dog began barking somewhere behind them. The sound echoed off the mud brick walls, seeming to announce their presence to anyone within a mile. Rodriguez cursed silently and motioned for his team to freeze. They waited for several tense minutes, but the voices from the compound continued without any change in tone or urgency. As they resumed their advance, Rodriguez noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt near the compound entrance. Multiple vehicles had been here recently, more than would be normal for a typical family residence. This detail confirmed their intelligence about the location being used for military purposes. The final approach required crossing an open area about 20 meters wide. Rodriguez studied the space carefully through his scope, looking for any signs of hidden threats. The compound walls were higher than they had appeared in the photographs, easily 10 feet tall with broken glass embedded along the top. He signaled for his marksmen to take position on a nearby rooftop, while the rest of the team prepared to breach the compound. The plan called for simultaneous entry from 2 points, overwhelming any defenders before they could organize effective resistance. Rodriguez checked his watch. They were slightly ahead of schedule, which was good. The element of surprise was crucial for this type of operation. He could see his other team leader through his scope, positioned and ready to begin their assault. The radio remained quiet except for the steady breathing of his team members. Rodriguez felt the weight of responsibility that came with leading men into danger. Each of these Marines had families back home, people who depended on them returning safely. He had written too many letters to next of kin over the years, and each one had carved away a piece of his soul. A movement near the compound gate caught his attention. A figure in traditional Afghan clothing emerged and began walking toward the village center. Rodriguez studied the man through his scope, noting the nervous way he looked around and the bulge under his clothing that suggested a concealed weapon. The man stopped directly between the two Marine teams, lighting a cigarette with hands that shook slightly. Rodriguez realized this might be a lookout, positioned to warn the compound if any threats approached. The mission timeline would need to be accelerated before their presence was discovered. He keyed his radio twice, the prearranged signal to prepare for immediate action. Around him, his Marines shifted into final positions, weapons ready, minds focused on the task ahead. The next few minutes would determine whether they returned home as heroes or in flag-draped coffins. Rodriguez took a deep breath and prepared to give the order that would change everything. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of children laughing, a reminder that innocent lives were at stake in this dangerous game of warfare. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a familiar burden as he prepared to lead his men into battle once again. The cigarette smoke drifted lazily in the morning air as Rodriguez made his decision. The lookout had to be neutralized quietly before they could proceed. He motioned to his sniper, Corporal Jensen, who was positioned on the adjacent rooftop. Through hand signals, Rodriguez communicated the threat and watched as Jensen adjusted his scope. The suppressed rifle made barely a whisper as the lookout crumpled to the ground. Rodriguez felt no satisfaction in the kill, only the grim necessity of protecting his team. They had seconds before someone noticed the fallen man. He keyed his radio 3 times, the signal to execute the breach. Both teams moved simultaneously toward their entry points. Rodriguez led his 4-man team to the main gate, while Team Alpha approached a side entrance they had identified in the reconnaissance photos. The compound walls loomed higher as they got closer, and Rodriguez could hear voices from within growing louder and more animated. The gate was secured with a heavy chain and padlock. Rodriguez nodded to his breacher, who quickly applied a small explosive charge. The blast would alert everyone inside, but speed was now more important than stealth. The explosion echoed through the valley like thunder, followed immediately by shouts and running footsteps from inside the compound. As the smoke cleared, Rodriguez was first through the breach. The courtyard was larger than expected, with several one-story buildings arranged around a central area. Armed men were emerging from doorways, some still pulling on equipment and weapons. The element of surprise was gone, but they still had the advantage of superior training and equipment. "Contact left," shouted Rodriguez, as muzzle flashes erupted from a window in the main building. Bullets whined overhead as his team took cover behind a low wall that ran along one side of the courtyard. The enemy fire was intense but poorly aimed, suggesting panic rather than disciplined resistance. Team Alpha reported heavy contact at their entry point as well. Rodriguez could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles, mixed with the deeper reports of American weapons. The sound of combat echoed off the compound walls, creating a confusing cacophony that made communication difficult. Rodriguez spotted movement in a second-story window of what appeared to be the main residence. Through his scope, he could see a bearded man in military-style clothing directing the defense. This could be their target, but positive identification would require getting closer. The intelligence photos had been taken from a distance and were not entirely clear. A grenade exploded near Team Alpha's position, sending a shower of dirt and debris into the air. Rodriguez heard someone scream over the radio, followed by urgent calls for a medic. His heart sank as he realized one of his Marines was down. The mission was rapidly becoming more costly than anticipated. "Jensen, can you get a clear shot on the second-story window?" Rodriguez called into his radio. The sniper's position should give him a good angle on the main building, but enemy fire was increasing in intensity. The defenders had overcome their initial surprise and were fighting back with determination. "Negative. Too much smoke and debris," came Jensen's reply. "But I can see reinforcements moving toward your position from the north building." Rodriguez cursed under his breath. Intelligence had estimated 12 to 15 enemy fighters. but it seemed like more kept appearing from hidden positions. The radio crackled with an urgent transmission from their command post. "Ground team, be advised we have intercepted enemy communications calling for reinforcements from nearby villages. You have approximately 15 minutes before additional hostiles arrive at your location." Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of command decisions pressing down on him. They could continue the assault and risk being overwhelmed when reinforcements arrived, or they could extract now and try again another day. But Team Alpha had a wounded Marine, and leaving without their target meant months of intelligence work would be wasted. A bullet struck the wall inches from Rodriguez's head, spraying fragments of concrete across his face. The enemy fire was becoming more accurate, as the defenders found better positions and coordinated their efforts. He needed to make a decision quickly before his team suffered more casualties. "Team Alpha, what's your status?" Rodriguez called into his radio while returning fire at muzzle flashes from the main building. The response was not encouraging. They had one Marine with a serious leg wound and were pinned down by enemy fire from multiple directions. Rodriguez spotted an opportunity. A gap in the enemy fire pattern suggested they were reloading or repositioning. He gathered his team for a coordinated assault on the main building where their target was likely hiding. If they could reach the structure and clear it room by room, they might still accomplish their mission. "On my mark, we bound forward to the main building," Rodriguez instructed his team. "Stay low and watch for secondary explosions. These guys have had time to prepare booby traps." His Marines nodded grimly, understanding the risks but trusting their leader's judgment. The assault began with covering fire from Jensen's position. As the enemy ducked to avoid the sniper's bullets, Rodriguez led his team in a sprinting advance across the open courtyard. The distance seemed endless as they ran through a hail of gunfire, but all four Marines reached the relative safety of the building's exterior wall. Rodriguez positioned his breacher at what appeared to be the main entrance, while he and another Marine covered the windows above. The building was larger than it had appeared from outside, possibly containing 6 or 8 rooms. Clearing it would take time they might not have. The door exploded inward under the force of another small charge. Rodriguez was first through the breach, his rifle raised and ready. The interior was dimly lit and filled with smoke from the explosion. He could hear movement from deeper in the building, but could not immediately identify threats. The first room contained religious texts and what appeared to be military planning materials spread across a large table. Maps of the local area were marked with positions and routes that suggested this was indeed a command center. Rodriguez felt a surge of satisfaction that their intelligence had been accurate. A burst of automatic fire from the next room sent Rodriguez diving for cover behind an overturned table. The enemy was fighting from prepared positions within the building, making the clearance operation extremely dangerous. Each room would have to be taken individually, with the constant risk of hidden explosives or ambush positions. The radio brought more bad news. Team Alpha was still pinned down and their wounded Marine was losing blood despite first aid efforts. The promised reinforcements were now estimated to arrive in less than 10 minutes. Rodriguez realized they were running out of time and options. As he prepared to assault the next room, Rodriguez heard a sound that made his blood run cold. The distinctive whistle of an incoming mortar round was growing louder, suggesting the enemy had called for indirect fire support. The compound was about to become an extremely dangerous place for everyone involved. The mortar round impacted somewhere in the courtyard behind them, the explosion shaking the entire building and raining dust from the ceiling. Rodriguez knew they had seconds before the enemy adjusted their fire and bracketed the main building. He had to make a choice between mission completion and team survival. "All teams prepare for immediate extraction," Rodriguez commanded into his radio. The mission objective was no longer worth the risk to his Marines. Through the smoke and chaos, he could see Team Alpha beginning to move their wounded teammate toward the extraction point. But as Rodriguez turned to lead his team out of the building, a voice called out in accented English from the room they had not yet cleared. "American soldiers, I wish to surrender. I have information you need." The voice was calm despite the gunfire and explosions surrounding them. Rodriguez froze. This could be their target attempting to negotiate, or it could be a trap designed to lure them deeper into the building. Every instinct told him to ignore the voice and extract his team immediately. But the intelligence value of capturing a high-ranking Taliban commander was enormous. Another mortar round impacted closer to the building, and Rodriguez could hear fragments striking the exterior walls. The enemy was walking their fire toward the structure, probably guided by spotters who had visual contact with the American positions. They had perhaps 2 minutes before the building became uninhabitable. "I am unarmed and coming out," the voice called again. Rodriguez positioned his team to cover the doorway while keeping one eye on the windows in case this was a coordinated ambush. The figure that emerged was a middle-aged Afghan man in traditional robes, his hands clearly visible and empty. Rodriguez recognized him immediately from the intelligence photographs. This was indeed their target, but something about his demeanor suggested desperation rather than defiance. The man's eyes were wide with fear, and he kept glancing toward the ceiling as the sounds of approaching aircraft grew louder. "You must get me out of here," the man said urgently. "My own people will kill me if they discover I wish to cooperate with Americans. There are things happening that you do not understand." Rodriguez studied the man's face, looking for signs of deception while another mortar round exploded in the courtyard. The radio crackled with Jensen's voice from his overwatch position. "Ground team, I count at least 20 additional hostiles approaching from the North Road. They have vehicles and heavy weapons. Recommend immediate extraction." The situation was deteriorating rapidly, but they now had their primary objective within reach. Rodriguez made a split-second decision that would haunt him for years to come. "We take him with us," he told his team. "But if this goes sideways, the mission comes first." His Marines nodded understanding, while maintaining their defensive positions around the prisoner. The extraction to their vehicles would require crossing the same open ground they had traversed during the assault, but now under even heavier fire. Rodriguez could see Team Alpha had reached their vehicle and were providing covering fire for his team's withdrawal. The wounded Marine appeared to be conscious but would need immediate medical attention. As they prepared to leave the building, the Taliban commander grabbed Rodriguez's arm. "The woman," he said urgently. "There is an American woman prisoner in the basement. They plan to use her in propaganda video today." Rodriguez felt his heart stop. No intelligence briefing had mentioned any American captives in the area. "What woman? Where exactly?" Rodriguez demanded, his mind racing through the implications. If there was an American prisoner, the mission parameters had completely changed. They could not leave without attempting a rescue, regardless of the tactical situation. The commander pointed toward a section of the building they had not yet explored. "Below the storage room there is hidden entrance. She has been there 3 days. They will kill her if they think Americans are close." Rodriguez looked at his watch and realized they had less than 60 seconds before the reinforcements arrived. The decision tore at him. Every military regulation and tactical manual said to extract immediately with their prisoner. But the thought of leaving an American woman to face execution or worse was unbearable. Rodriguez keyed his radio to update his team leaders on the new situation. "Ground team, we have possible American hostage in the basement level. Adjusting mission to locate and extract." The response from his command post was immediate and predictable. They were ordered to extract immediately and let specialist teams handle any hostage situation. But Rodriguez was already moving toward the storage room, his team following without question, despite the obvious danger. The sounds of approaching vehicles were getting louder, and sporadic gunfire continued from multiple directions. They had perhaps 90 seconds before being completely surrounded. The storage room was filled with ammunition boxes and military equipment, confirming this location's importance as a supply depot. Rodriguez searched frantically for any sign of a hidden entrance while his team maintained security. The Taliban commander pointed to a section of floor that looked different from the surrounding area. Rodriguez pried up several floorboards to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The smell that rose from below was unmistakably human, mixed with fear and desperation. He grabbed a flashlight and started down the stairs, leaving 2 Marines to guard the prisoner and maintain communication with the extraction team. The basement was smaller than expected, with stone walls that seemed to absorb his flashlight beam. In the far corner, Rodriguez saw what appeared to be a bundle of clothing. As he approached, the bundle moved and a voice whispered, "Please don't hurt me anymore." Rodriguez felt a surge of anger as he realized they had found an American woman, probably a journalist or aid worker who had been captured while traveling in the region. She was in poor condition but conscious, her eyes reflecting terror and hope in equal measure as she recognized his American uniform. "Ma'am, I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps. We're here to get you out." The woman began crying with relief, but Rodriguez knew their troubles were just beginning. Getting her to the extraction point would require exposing his entire team to additional risk. The radio erupted with urgent calls as Team Alpha reported enemy vehicles entering the compound. The reinforcements had arrived earlier than expected, and the tactical situation was rapidly becoming untenable. Rodriguez had to choose between a guaranteed extraction with their original prisoner or risking everything for a rescue that might fail. As he helped the woman to her feet, Rodriguez heard the distinctive sound of rocket-propelled grenades being fired at their position. The building shook violently as explosions bracketed their location. They were running out of time and options, trapped in a basement while enemy forces closed in from all directions. The woman gripped his arm with surprising strength. "There are others," she whispered urgently. "2 more Americans in another location. They told me before they moved me here." Rodriguez closed his eyes briefly, realizing the mission had just become infinitely more complicated. Rodriguez felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him as the building shook from another explosion. 2 more Americans held captive somewhere nearby, a rescued hostage who could barely walk, a high-value prisoner with vital intelligence, and his own team trapped in an increasingly desperate situation. The radio crackled with reports that enemy reinforcements now numbered at least 30 fighters with heavy weapons. "Where are the other Americans?" Rodriguez asked the woman urgently while helping her toward the stairs. She was weak from her captivity but seemed to understand the gravity of their situation. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, she told him, a medical worker who had been captured while delivering supplies to a remote village. "About 2 kilometers north, in a compound near the river," she whispered. "A man and woman, both journalists. They've been there longer than me." Rodriguez's heart sank as he realized those prisoners were far beyond their current capability to rescue. His priority had to be getting Sarah and his team out alive. The ascent from the basement took precious seconds as Sarah struggled with each step. Rodriguez could hear his Marines above maintaining defensive positions, while enemy fire intensified around the building. The Taliban commander waited where they had left him, but Rodriguez noticed the man's demeanor had changed from fear to something approaching calculation. "The reinforcements include my brother," the commander said quietly, as they reached the main floor. "He will not negotiate for prisoners. If you wish to leave this place alive, you must trust me completely." Rodriguez studied the man's face, trying to determine if this was genuine cooperation or an elaborate deception. Team Alpha reported they were taking heavy casualties trying to maintain the extraction point. Their wounded Marine was unconscious and losing blood rapidly, and they were running critically low on ammunition. Rodriguez realized they might need to abandon their vehicles and find an alternative escape route. The radio brought more devastating news. Jensen, their sniper providing overwatch, had been forced to abandon his position due to enemy fire. Without his covering support, any movement across the compound would be extremely dangerous. Rodriguez felt the tactical situation slipping away from them with each passing minute. Sarah collapsed against the wall, her strength finally giving out. Rodriguez could see she would not be able to move quickly enough for a fighting withdrawal to their vehicles. They needed a different plan, but options were disappearing as enemy forces tightened their encirclement of the compound. "There is another way out," the Taliban commander said urgently. "A tunnel system connects this building to a position outside the walls. It was built for smuggling operations, but it will serve our purpose now." Rodriguez was skeptical but realized they might have no other choice. The sound of approaching helicopters gave Rodriguez a moment of hope until he realized they were not American aircraft. The distinctive rotor noise suggested older Soviet-era helicopters, probably operated by Taliban forces or their allies. The enemy was bringing air support to the battle. Rodriguez made another command decision that would define the rest of the operation. "Show us this tunnel," he told the commander while motioning for his team to prepare for movement. Sarah would need to be carried, but 3 Marines could manage that while maintaining defensive capability. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall in what appeared to be a prayer room. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a man carrying equipment, and disappeared into darkness beyond the reach of their flashlights. Rodriguez had no way to verify where it led or whether it was a trap. "I will go first to prove it is safe," the Taliban commander offered. Rodriguez agreed but positioned a Marine directly behind him, with orders to shoot at the first sign of treachery. The group began their underground journey with Sarah supported between two Marines. The tunnel was longer than expected, extending far beyond the compound walls before beginning a gradual upward slope. Rodriguez estimated they had traveled nearly 300 meters when they saw natural light filtering down from ahead. The commander had been truthful about the exit location. They emerged in a grove of trees about half a kilometer from the compound, well beyond the enemy perimeter. Rodriguez immediately established security while assessing their new situation. They were alive and temporarily safe, but still several kilometers from any friendly forces with limited ammunition and a seriously injured teammate. The radio finally brought good news. Command had dispatched a quick reaction force with helicopter support after losing contact with their ground teams. The rescue force was approximately 20 minutes out, but Rodriguez needed to reach a suitable landing zone and maintain communication until they arrived. Sarah had regained some strength during their underground journey and was able to walk with assistance. She provided Rodriguez with additional intelligence about the enemy forces, including the location of weapons caches and the identities of other high-value targets in the area. Her information would prove invaluable for future operations. The Taliban commander continued to cooperate, providing details about insurgent activities and offering to guide them to the landing zone. Rodriguez remained suspicious of his motives, but recognized that the man's local knowledge was their best hope for successful extraction. As they moved through the countryside toward the designated landing zone, Rodriguez reflected on the series of decisions that had brought them to this point. The mission had evolved far beyond its original parameters, and the cost in American casualties was higher than anyone had anticipated. The sound of American helicopters approaching filled Rodriguez with relief, but he knew their ordeal was far from over. Team Alpha was still trapped in the compound with their wounded Marine, and the 2 additional American prisoners remained in enemy hands. The day's mission would be recorded as partially successful, but Rodriguez felt the weight of incomplete objectives. The landing zone was a flat area near an abandoned farm building, large enough for helicopter operations but exposed to observation from surrounding hills. Rodriguez positioned his team in defensive positions while signaling their location to the incoming aircraft. The Taliban commander remained cooperative, even helping to carry equipment. Sarah Mitchell would later testify before Congress about her captivity and rescue, providing crucial intelligence that led to successful operations against insurgent networks. The Taliban commander's cooperation resulted in the capture of several high-ranking enemy leaders and the disruption of major supply routes. But for Rodriguez, crouched in an Afghan field waiting for extraction while enemy forces regrouped nearby, the mission felt incomplete. Somewhere in the distance, 2 Americans remained prisoners and one of his Marines lay wounded in a compound they had been forced to abandon. The moral weight of those realities would stay with him long after the helicopters carried them to safety. The rescue helicopters appeared as dark silhouettes against the afternoon sky, their rotor wash creating clouds of dust that provided some concealment from distant observers. Rodriguez felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as the aircraft approached their position. Extraction meant safety for his current team, but it also meant leaving Team Alpha behind in an increasingly dangerous situation. The lead helicopter touched down 50 meters from their position, while the second aircraft maintained overwatch with door gunners scanning for threats. Rodriguez helped Sarah Mitchell toward the aircraft while maintaining radio contact with the pilot. The Taliban commander moved cooperatively, understanding that his value as an intelligence asset depended on continued cooperation. "Ground team, this is Dustoff 7-2. The pilot's voice crackled through Rodriguez's headset. "We have reports of heavy fighting at your original position. Team Alpha is requesting immediate reinforcement and medical evacuation." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop as he realized the situation at the compound had deteriorated further. The helicopter's crew chief helped Sarah into the cabin while Rodriguez made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "I'm going back for Team Alpha," he announced over the radio. "Get these people to safety and send the quick reaction force to my coordinates." The pilot protested, But Rodriguez was already removing his equipment from the aircraft. Two of his Marines volunteered to accompany him, despite the obvious danger of returning to a combat zone with minimal backup. Rodriguez accepted their offer, knowing that Team Alpha's survival might depend on immediate assistance. The Taliban commander also requested to return, claiming knowledge of routes that could help them reach the trapped Marines. As the helicopters departed with Sarah and most of his team, Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders once again. They were now a four-man team attempting to rescue an entire squad from a heavily defended position. The odds were not encouraging, but Rodriguez had never abandoned fellow Marines in combat. The journey back toward the compound required careful movement through terrain that was now swarming with enemy forces. Rodriguez used his experience and the commander's local knowledge to avoid detection while closing the distance to Team Alpha's last known position. Radio communication was sporadic due to enemy jamming, but they occasionally received fragmented updates. The sound of intense gunfire grew louder as they approached the compound area. Through his binoculars, Rodriguez could see that Team Alpha had been forced to abandon their vehicles and take shelter in a partially destroyed building, about 200 meters from the original target. Enemy forces had surrounded the position and were conducting a deliberate assault. Rodriguez studied the tactical situation carefully. Team Alpha appeared to have approximately 15 minutes of ammunition remaining, based on their rate of fire. The wounded Marine was still alive but needed immediate medical attention that was impossible under current conditions. Enemy forces numbered at least 40 fighters with supporting weapons. The Taliban commander pointed out a route that would allow them to approach Team Alpha's position from an unexpected direction. The path required crossing a dried riverbed that offered concealment, but would expose them to observation from multiple enemy positions. Rodriguez weighed the risks against the certainty that Team Alpha would be overrun without assistance. "Jensen, if you can hear this transmission, we are moving to your position from the south." Rodriguez broadcast on their emergency frequency. The response was immediate and filled with static, but he could make out Jensen's voice, confirming they had received the message and would watch for friendly movement. The advance across the riverbed took nearly 30 minutes of careful movement under sporadic enemy fire. Rodriguez could see Team Alpha's muzzle flashes in the distance, but the rate of fire was decreasing as their ammunition ran low. The wounded Marine was visible through a gap in the building's walls. Motionless but apparently still breathing, Rodriguez positioned his small team to provide maximum support for Team Alpha's extraction. The plan was simple but dangerous. Create enough chaos to allow the trapped Marines to reach a more defensible position while calling in fire support from the incoming quick reaction force. Success would require precise timing and considerable luck. The assault began with Rodriguez's marksmen engaging enemy positions from an unexpected angle, causing confusion and drawing fire away from Team Alpha's building. The Taliban commander proved surprisingly effective with an AK-47, engaging targets with accuracy that suggested military training beyond his apparent status as a political leader. Team Alpha responded immediately to the supporting fire by attempting to move their wounded teammate toward better cover. Rodriguez could see Jensen and another Marine carrying their injured comrade while the remaining team members provided covering fire. The distance they needed to traverse was only 50 meters, but it represented the difference between survival and capture. Enemy return fire was intense and increasingly accurate, as the defenders realized they were facing a coordinated rescue attempt. Rodriguez felt bullets whining past his position, while he engaged targets that were trying to flank Team Alpha's new position. The tactical situation remained desperate despite their intervention. The radio crackled with the voice of the Quick Reaction Force commander. "Ground team, this is Hammer 6. We are inbound your position with close air support. Mark your positions and prepare for danger close fire missions." Rodriguez felt a surge of hope as he realized significant reinforcements were finally arriving. Rodriguez marked his team's position with colored smoke while directing the incoming aircraft toward enemy concentrations. The sound of jet engines overhead grew louder as close air support aircraft prepared to engage targets around the compound. The enemy forces would soon face firepower they could not match. The first airstrike landed among enemy positions 200 meters from Team Alpha's location, the explosion sending a pillar of smoke and debris into the sky. Rodriguez could see enemy fighters scattering from their positions, some running toward vehicles while others sought shelter in buildings. But the celebration was premature. A massive explosion erupted from Team Alpha's position, sending chunks of concrete and metal flying through the air. Rodriguez watched in horror as the building where his Marines had taken shelter collapsed in a cloud of dust and smoke. The enemy had managed to position explosives or rocket fire that brought down the entire structure. Rodriguez was already running toward the collapsed building before the debris stopped falling. Behind him, his 2 Marines and the Taliban commander followed, all understanding that time was critical for any survivors trapped in the rubble. The Quick Reaction Force helicopters were landing nearby, but rescue efforts would require immediate action. As Rodriguez reached the edge of the destruction, he could hear faint voices calling for help from beneath the collapsed walls. At least some of Team Alpha had survived the explosion, but their condition was unknown. Heavy lifting equipment would be needed to clear the debris, and they had only their bare hands and determination. Rodriguez clawed at the rubble with desperate intensity, his hands already bleeding from sharp concrete fragments. The voices beneath the debris were growing weaker, and he knew they had only minutes before crush injuries and shock claimed his trapped Marines. The Quick Reaction Force had arrived with additional manpower, but heavy machinery would take too long to deploy. "Here, I can hear someone under this section," shouted Corporal Martinez, one of the Marines who had returned with Rodriguez. The team immediately converged on the location, forming a human chain to pass debris away from the potential survivor location. Every second counted as they worked to create an opening in the collapsed structure. The Taliban commander surprised everyone by working alongside the Americans without hesitation, his robes quickly becoming covered in dust and blood as he lifted chunks of concrete. Rodriguez noticed the man's determination and filed away another reason to believe his cooperation was genuine, rather than opportunistic. A faint voice called out from beneath their feet, barely audible above the sounds of rescue efforts. "Rodriguez, is that you?" The voice belonged to Jensen, the sniper who had provided overwatch for the entire mission. Rodriguez felt a surge of hope as he realized at least one of his Marines was conscious and able to communicate. "We're getting you out, Jensen. How many others can you account for?" Rodriguez called back while continuing to clear debris. The response was muffled but indicated that Jensen could hear at least 2 other Marines in the confined space beneath the collapsed walls. The wounded Marine's status remained unknown. The rescue efforts intensified as more members of the Quick Reaction Force arrived with specialized equipment. Combat engineers began establishing lifting points while medics prepared for multiple casualties. Rodriguez coordinated the effort while maintaining security against any remaining enemy forces in the area. After nearly an hour of backbreaking labor, they created an opening large enough to extract the first survivor. Jensen emerged covered in dust and blood, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle, but he was conscious and able to walk with assistance. His first words were about his teammates still trapped below. "Cooper is unconscious but breathing," Jensen reported as medics examined his injuries. "Williams has a leg injury but was talking a few minutes ago. I lost contact with Thompson, our original wounded Marine, about 20 minutes ago." The medic's expression grew more urgent as he realized they were racing against time to save lives. Rodriguez directed the rescue teams to concentrate on the areas where Jensen indicated his teammates were located. The collapsed building had created a maze of concrete slabs and twisted metal that made extraction extremely dangerous. One wrong move could cause additional collapse and kill the very Marines they were trying to save. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air as additional medical evacuation aircraft arrived to transport casualties to field hospitals. Rodriguez felt the pressure of time weighing on every decision as he balanced rescue speed against safety. Each minute that passed reduced the chances of survival for the trapped Marines. Combat engineers managed to stabilize a large concrete slab that was threatening to shift and crush the remaining trapped survivors. Using hydraulic jacks and steel supports, they created a small tunnel that would allow access to the Marines below. The opening was barely wide enough for a single person, and the structural integrity remained questionable. Rodriguez made the decision to enter the tunnel himself, despite protests from the rescue team leader. As the commanding officer, he felt responsible for every Marine under his command, and he would not ask others to take risks he was unwilling to face. Armed with a flashlight and first aid supplies, he crawled into the narrow space beneath the debris. The scene inside the collapsed structure was devastating. Marine Williams was conscious but trapped beneath a steel beam that had crushed his leg. Cooper lay motionless nearby, his breathing shallow but steady. Thompson, the originally wounded Marine, was barely alive, his previous injuries compounded by the building collapse. Rodriguez worked frantically to stabilize Thompson's condition while calling for additional medical supplies to be passed through the tunnel. The space was so confined that he could barely move, but he managed to establish an intravenous line and administer pain medication. Thompson's pulse was weak but detectable. "Williams, can you hear me?" Rodriguez called to the conscious Marine. Williams responded with a weak thumbs up, indicating he was alert despite his obvious pain. The beam pinning his leg would require heavy equipment to lift, but Rodriguez could see that immediate amputation might be necessary to save the Marine's life. The rescue team above had managed to widen the tunnel slightly, allowing them to pass down a medical stretcher and additional supplies. Rodriguez began the delicate process of preparing Thompson for extraction, while medics outside prepared for emergency surgery. Every movement had to be careful to avoid triggering another collapse. Cooper regained consciousness as Rodriguez was examining his injuries. The Marine had suffered a severe concussion and possible internal injuries, but he was coherent enough to assist with his own evacuation. Rodriguez felt a surge of relief as he realized all 4 trapped Marines were alive, though their conditions remained critical. The extraction of Thompson required nearly 30 minutes of careful maneuvering through the tunnel system. Rodriguez remained with the most seriously injured Marine throughout the process, monitoring his vital signs and administering medical care in the confined space. When Thompson finally reached the surface, medical teams immediately began emergency procedures. Williams' extraction proved more complicated due to the steel beam pinning his leg. Combat engineers worked for over an hour to cut through the metal, while Rodriguez maintained pressure on bleeding wounds and administered pain medication. The Marine remained conscious throughout the ordeal, even making jokes to keep morale up among the rescue teams. Cooper was able to crawl out of the tunnel with minimal assistance once a clear path was established. His injuries were serious but not life-threatening, and he insisted on helping with Williams' extraction despite medical protests. The bond between Marines was evident as they refused to leave anyone behind. When Williams finally emerged from the rubble, his leg was severely damaged but still attached. Rodriguez watched as the medical team immediately transported him to a waiting helicopter for emergency surgery. The Marine gave a weak salute as the aircraft lifted off, a gesture that brought tears to Rodriguez's eyes. The Taliban commander had remained at the rescue site throughout the entire operation, working alongside American forces without complaint. As the last helicopter prepared to depart, he approached Rodriguez with a solemn expression. "Your Marines fought with great honor," he said quietly. It was privileged to witness such dedication. Rodriguez looked back at the destroyed compound one final time as their helicopter lifted off. The mission had accomplished its primary objectives. They had captured a high-value target, rescued an American hostage, and successfully extracted all team members alive. But the cost had been enormous, and the 2 additional American prisoners remained in enemy hands. The flight to the forward operating base gave Rodriguez time to reflect on the day's events. Every decision had carried life or death consequences, and he wondered if different choices might have resulted in better outcomes. The weight of command would stay with him long after the official debriefings were completed. Sarah Mitchell would recover from her captivity and return to humanitarian work, though in safer regions. Thompson would spend months in military hospitals but would eventually return to active duty. Williams would lose his leg below the knee, but would refuse medical retirement and continue serving as an instructor. Cooper would make a full recovery and volunteer for additional combat deployments. The intelligence provided by the Taliban commander would lead to the successful rescue of the 2 remaining American prisoners within 6 weeks. Rodriguez would receive the Silver Star for his actions during the mission, though he would always feel that the real heroes were the Marines who had followed him into danger without question. Years later, Rodriguez would tell people that the mission taught him the true meaning of leadership under fire. In the crucible of combat, when everything was falling apart and the odds seemed impossible, the only thing that mattered was the bond between Marines and their commitment to bringing everyone home alive.